Winston Churchill is regarded as the greatest Briton to have ever lived, and he is seen as a figure of victory over the evils of Nazism. Churchill oversaw the British involvement of the Second World War, following the resignation of Neville Chamberlain. He is seen as one of the 20th century's most important figures, and he had an incredible life. But on the 24th of January 1965, he passed away. A huge state funeral was planned for the man who led Britain to victory against Hitler. Join us today as we look at the painful death of Winston Churchill, and remember to support our channel. Please make sure to subscribe. During the darkest hours of World War II, Prime Minister Winston Churchill inspired the UK and the rest of the world. He believed Britain could stand firm against the Nazis, no matter how tough it would be. His famous speech stated, "We shall fight on the beaches, we shall fight on the landing grounds, we shall fight in the fields and in the streets, we shall fight in the hills, we shall never surrender." This is classed as his finest hour speech, in which he inspired Britain in the face of the Battle of Britain, which would take place against the Luftwaffe. Throughout his life, he was known to have suffered with a number of conditions. It's believed that in December 1941, shortly after the Pearl Harbor attack, Churchill, whilst at the White House, suffered a mild heart attack. He was there to work on relations with his ally Roosevelt, however he was taken ill. 2 years later he also contracted pneumonia, but he was known for being a man who did not live the healthiest of lives, eating whatever he wished, smoking cigars, and also enjoying many alcoholic beverages. Some historians have even claimed that he was bipolar, but it's considered that he did suffer from depression, as he would work incredibly hard sometimes, even past midnight, but other days he could not get out of bed. In the summer of 1949, he went to the south of France to rest up, but whilst here it's believed he could have suffered from a stroke. He lost sensation in his right arm and right leg, and this was dealt with very discreetly. It was said at the villa that he contracted a chill whilst bathing, but he did recover rather quickly and went back to England. The biggest shock after the Second World War was that his party lost the election, but on the 24th of October 1951, he became the Prime Minister once again. In June 1953, during a dinner to honour the Italian Prime Minister, Churchill gave a speech, but had to stop as he could not continue with discussions, and he was slumped in his chair. It was noticed how he looked weak on his left side, then he went back to his room. The following day he conducted a cabinet meeting, and he was then taken back to his country home, Chartwell in Kent. The British public and Parliament were informed he was suffering from exhaustion, but it was noticed at the dinner that his mouth was drooping and his left side was weak. This was the second high blood pressure related stroke that he had suffered, and it's believed this was caused by a blockage of small arteries leading to the brain. Whilst at Chartwell, he was given great care and physical rehab, but during the time of the Cold War, the news blackout meant that Churchill could not be seen as ill. But one person who was informed was the Queen, Elizabeth II. Following this, the Queen, who had been on the throne for just a year, instructed the 16th Duke of Norfolk as Earl Marshal, whose role placed him in charge of state funerals, to prepare for Churchill's death. She said that the funeral should be on a scale befitting his position in history, and a plan named Operation Hope Not was drawn up. Churchill would live for the next 12 years, and during this time different amendments were made for his state funeral plan, and the final document called State Funeral of the late Sir Winston Leonard Spencer Churchill was issued days after his death, and this contained how the funeral would play out in every minuscule detail. In his role as Prime Minister, he was nearly 77 when he took office, and he was not in good health then. But George VI had become concerned about his health earlier, and intended to ask him to stand down, but the King himself died without making this formal request. It's believed Churchill would retire after Elizabeth II's coronation, but he eventually did so in April 1955. But on the 24th of January 1965, inside his home at 28 Hyde Park Gate, London, Churchill passed away. Following the Second World War, he had suffered from at least 8 strokes, and his final one occurred on the 15th of January 1965. Following this stroke, which was very serious, he was mostly in bed with a coma. His final words uttered were to his son-in-law, and Churchill stated, "I'm so bored with it all," complaining that he had had enough of his life and the pain caused by his stroke. The public had been informed of his stroke, and they were anxious of his health. But shortly after 8 in the morning of Sunday the 24th of January, he died surrounded by some of his friends and also his doctor. The Queen and Prime Minister were informed of his passing, and the BBC told the news at 9 a.m. The Prime Minister stated, "Sir Winston will be mourned all over the world by all who owe so much to him. He is now at peace after a life in which he created history, and which will be remembered as long as history is read." Tributes also came from the US President, who said, "When there was darkness in the world, and hope was low in the hearts of man, a generous providence gave us Winston Churchill. As long as man tell of the time of terrible danger, and of the men who won the victory, the name Churchill will live. He is history's child, and what he said and what he did will never die." It was said in Parliament that Churchill's body was to lie in state at Westminster Hall, and that the funeral service would take place in St Paul's Cathedral. The royal funeral directors were then given the job of embalming Churchill's body for the funeral. He was embalmed in the same room that he passed away. Then his body was dressed in his silk pyjamas and dressing gown, and he was placed back in bed. He was then left in bed until 9 p.m. on Tuesday evening, before his remains were taken to Westminster Hall to lie in state for the public to view. He was taken there and was placed on a raised platform, before different watches took turn guarding his remains. This remained until the 30th of January, and Westminster Hall was kept open for 23 hours a day, and over 300,000 people came to pay their respects. Churchill's funeral service began on the 30th of January, with Big Ben chiming at 9:45 a.m. The clock was then silenced for the day, and 90 cannon salutes were shot at Hyde Park, one for each of Churchill's years. His coffin was then placed on a gun carriage and was draped with the Union flag, and the Order of the Garter placed above a black cushion. The coffin was carried by a party of 8 guards from the 2nd Battalion Grenadier Guards, and his son and grandson followed the coffin, along with male members of the Churchill family and his private secretary. Lady Churchill and his daughters followed in the Queen's town coach, and the march continued throughout London. It passed through Trafalgar Square and the Strand, before making its arrival at St Paul's. There was a huge military presence, and in the service at St Paul's, 3,500 people were there. The Queen was present, which broke protocol, as she did not normally attend funerals for commoners, but she also broke royal etiquette by not arriving last. There were 12 pallbearers, including Clement Attlee, the former Prime Minister, who was in his 80s and was frail, but he insisted on doing the job. But he did stumble and the coffin was nearly dropped, but it was saved. A huge number of foreign dignitaries were also there, including wartime leader Charles de Gaulle and former Allied General Supreme Commander Dwight Eisenhower. Following the ceremony, an elaborate and huge procession of Churchill's coffin to its final place of rest occurred. The coffin was carried to the Tower of London, where the Royal Artillery fired a 19-gun salute before the coffin was taken aboard the Havengor, a passenger ship. The Royal Marine Band played a musical salute before fighter jets flew above as the boat sailed down the River Thames. As it passed, over 35 dockers lowered their crane jibs, saluting Churchill in a spectacular sight. This was not part of the plan, but was a remarkable personal tribute. From the ship, the coffin was picked up at Festival Pier and was transported to Waterloo Station. His coffin was then transferred to St Martin's Churchyard in Oxfordshire and was interred there. The funeral of Sir Winston Churchill was regarded by the family as a triumph, but it was befitting of the man who is still seen today as a national treasure. Churchill was the icon who was seen as a strength and bullish figure behind the victorious Allied efforts against Nazism in the Second World War. To many during the conflict, in the lowest times in Britain, with London being bombed heavily in the Blitz, Churchill was seen as an iconic symbol of defiance, British spirit, and that good will prevail over evil. He was 90 when he passed away, and his life was filled with intrigue, politics, and incredible moments. Once again, thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.